The U.S. is actually also on board in finding new ways to go after Russia's wealthiest after the country invaded Ukraine. Task Force Klepto Capture, that's the name of President Biden's brand new interagency task force designed to enforce sanctions and restrictions on Russian oligarchs and freeze their assets in foreign countries, many who derive their wealth from their close ties to Vladimir Putin. This as the European Union announced the removal of 7 additional Russian banks from the SWIFT messaging system, including the country's second largest bank now, VTB. Former UBS America's chairman and CEO and Fox News contributor Robert Wolf knows just a little bit about SWIFT, I would imagine, Robert. This has become common knowledge for a lot of people in the past 7 days, something they didn't know about, but this vast network where 11,000 financial institutions use it to conduct all kinds of trade or financial moves, et cetera. But, how important is it to any bank?
I mean, it's how we communicate. It's Gmail meets Venmo. So there's no funds in SWIFT, but everything else around it, from the messaging to the communication. So if company A wants to do business with company B, company A tells their bank, that bank tells company B's bank, and company B bank tell the company, and that's how you do commerce. For the most part, this is how commerce is done. And without it, I mean, you're seeing what's happening. Russia is being isolated, they're blacklisted, they're being choked from all types of commerce, and which is why they can't even open up their market. The ruble's getting annihilated. You've been doing an amazing job, discussing it. And I know, Liz, that everyone's worried about, well, what about oil embargo? I mean, let's be clear. If you're not willing to be a counterparty of the bank, and you're nervous that the shipments may or may not get there because you could see a trade embargo and an oil embargo, why do you think anyone's even buying Russian oil right now? There's a reason I would tell you that Russia's being choked in every which way. And I think one thing you mentioned earlier, Sberbank, which is the largest bank, is not on the is able to use SWIFT, but their stock is down 99% in the London exchange.
It's going to collapse, isn't it? I mean, you're a banker, you would know.
So you don't need to have a nail in every coffin to know that you're already 6 feet under. So I would tell you, Russia, from a financial perspective, from a capital markets perspective, if I'm a Russian citizen, I'm saying, like, what just happened in the last week, where all of a sudden we are blackballed by the world. And I think what we hope is Ukraine comes out on top and democracy wins.
We're showing Russian-based ETFs. RTX, which is the VanEck Vectors Russia ETF, hit a brand new all-time low. It's never been this low, Robert. So can these things survive? And how long before it stops Putin? Because they're still bombing.
Yeah, well, there's two different things here. You're talking about, a war, and I think Putin has, something, a screw loose in his mind that, he believes he can take over in a democracy, and we're going back to the pre-Cold War days. That being said, that's very different from what I would say finance, capital markets, commerce, and he's really being shut off. And I would tell you that a few days ago, the U.S. was waiting for where Saudi was going to be, and the Emirates and Turkey and other areas, and you're even seeing them come on board.
Exactly, and Switzerland, so your former bank, right?
It only takes time. I mean, I look at, when I was running UBS as president of the investment bank globally, we were, us and Deutsche were the two by far largest banks in Russia, and that was during the Russia crisis. And, you need the capital markets. You can't have a run on the bank. I mean, you need to exist, and they're cutting themselves off. I mean, similar to what Iran has done.
We've just had some headlines from Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and he is saying that Putin's $630 billion war chest reserve vaporized because he can't really access it. Jamie Dimon said yesterday that he foresees some unintended consequences from all of these sanctions. Now, somebody like me says, too bad. We're going to have to endure a little pain considering what the Ukrainians are doing and how Russia is jumping in there with its iron fist. But President Biden just had his State of the Union address last night, and there were 96 or so standing ovation applauses where he was interrupted. Only a couple of them involved the Republican side of the aisle. Here's one of them that had to do with the police. It's getting a lot of attention. We wanted our viewers to hear it. But I need you to tell us where else he could have built some bridges in the business world. Listen.
The answer is not to defund the police. It's to fund the police. Fund them. Fund them.
You can see the Republican Senate and members of Congress there all standing, but there weren't that many of those moments, were there?
You know, I would probably phrase it a little differently. I would say there were three aspects to the speech. The first one was patriotism and democracy, which really was evolved around Ukraine, and everyone applauded that. And I think that brings us much more together than we have been 2 weeks ago. I believe the second one was much more on what I would call a reset. One, we do have inflation. Two, we have to look at immigration reform. Yeah. Three, of course, we have to fund the police. And those were and kind of a reset on Build Back Better, which I actually think makes a lot of sense. We should look at it as post-pandemic needs, elder care, child care, the cost of health care. I think the third part is where can we work together? Okay. And the truth is there's a lot of places we can work together, and I think it was very well received. The one thing that rears its ugly head every day that you've been talking about is inflation. Yeah. And we don't have a good answer to that today. Robert, and that's what everyone wants.
Good to see you, my friend. Thank you very much.